Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. Glad you're here. This is Fyodor Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, Part 5. We're halfway through it. We're beginning our last half of this groundbreaking, wonderful, confusing story. Isn't it confusing? We left off with our anonymous narrator getting ready to go over with the boys that he invited himself into Zherkov's, the officer's celebration. Once he began a gesture, he had to do it. He had to do it, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, you can email me anytime, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Let's get started. Part 5, Dostoevsky's Note from Underground. Ready? Here we go. He actually polished his boots twice. That's what the beginning of that first sentence is. And then I minutely examined my clothes and thought that everything looked old and worn and threadbare. I had let myself get too slovenly. My uniform perhaps was tidy, but I could not go out to dinner in my uniform. The worst of it was that on the knee of my trousers there was a big yellow stain. I had a foreboding that that stain would deprive me of 9/10 of my personal dignity. Remember how he feels about math, right? He doesn't like it. Math, there's no mathematical certainty, but he's going to be deprived of 9/10 of his personal dignity. I knew, too, that it was very poor to think so. Quote, "But this is no time for thinking now. I am in for the real thing," I thought, and my heart sank. What does he mean by that, ladies and gentlemen? I'm in for the real thing. He's going to leave his head. He's not going to be living inside his head. He's going to a dinner. I knew too perfectly well, even then, that I was monstrously exaggerating the facts. But how could I help it? I could not control myself and was already shaking with fever. With despair, I pictured to myself how coldly and disdainfully that scoundrel, quote, Zherkov, would meet me, with what dull-witted, invincible contempt that the blockhead, Trudolobov, right, would look at me, and with impudent rudeness, the insect Ferfetchkin would snigger at me in order to curry favor with Zherkov. So he's imagining all this stuff, right? Trudolobov. These Russian names, huh? How completely Simonov would take it all in, and how he would despise me for the abjectness of my vanity and lack of spirit, and worst of all, how paltry, unliterary, commonplace it would all be. Unliterary. See, he reads a lot of books, right? It's just not literary. Of course, the best thing would be not to go at all. But that was most impossible of all. If I feel impelled to do anything, I seem to be pitchforked into it. I should have jeered at myself even afterwards. Quote, "So, you funked it. You funked it. You funked the real thing." What's the word funk? Funked it is a slang verb that means to fail due to panic or fear. You funked it. It sounds like a certain curse word, doesn't it? So you can actually use this word from now on, ladies and gentlemen. You funked it up. What do you mean? Are you swearing at me? No, funked it. F-U-N-K. On the contrary, I passionately longed to show all of that, quote, rabble, that I was by no means such a spiritless creature as I seemed to be to myself. What is more, even in the acutest paroxysm of this cowardly fever, I dreamed of getting the upper hand, of dominating them and carrying them away, making them like me. If only for my, quote, elevation of thought and unmistakable wit. Boy, he thinks a lot of himself, doesn't he? They would abandon Zherkov, and he would sit on one side, silent, ashamed, while I should crush him. And then perhaps we would be reconciled, and we would drink to our everlasting friendship. But what was most bitter and most humiliating for me was that I knew even then, I knew fully and for certain that I needed nothing of all this really. And then I didn't really want to crush or subdue or track them. And then I did not even care a straw, really, for the result, even if I did achieve it. Oh, how I prayed for the day to pass quickly. In unutterable anguish, I went to the window, opened the movable pane, and looked out into the troubled darkness of the thickly falling wet snow. Notice the use of adjectives here? Troubled. It's not just dark. It's troubled darkness. You see how he interprets everything around him according to him? Sometimes we all do that, don't we? That's one of the things I want you to think about, ladies and gentlemen, when you're reading this type of novel. At last, my wretched little clock hissed out 5, and I seized my hat trying to not look at Apollon, who had been all day expecting his month's wages, but in his foolishness was unwilling to be the first to speak about it. I split between him and the door, and so he goes between Apollon, the servant, and the door, and he jumps into a high-class sledge on which I spent my last half ruble. Pardon me. I drove up in grand style to the Hotel de Paris. Chapter 4. This is the second part. We read the first part. Now this is part 2, chapter 4. I had been certain the day before that I should be the first to arrive. But it was not a question of being the first to arrive. Not only were they not here, but I had difficulty finding our room. The table wasn't even laid. Well, what did it mean? After a good many questions, I elicited from the waiters that the dinner had been ordered not for 5, but for 6 o'clock. Well, this was confirmed at the buffet, too. I felt really ashamed to go on questioning them. It was only 25 minutes past 5. If they changed the dinner hour, they ought to have at least let me know. That is what the post is for. And they can send a letter by messenger. And not to have even put me in an absurd position in my own eyes? And even before the waiters? I sat down. The servant began laying the table. I even felt even more humiliated when he was present. Toward 6 o'clock, they brought in candles, though there were lamps burning in the room. It had not occurred to the waiter, however, to bring them in at once when I arrived. Idiot. In the next room, 2 gloomy, angry-looking persons were eating their dinners in silence at 2 different tables. There was a great deal of noise, even shouting, in a room further away, and one could hear the laughter of a crowd of people and nasty little shrieks in French. There were ladies at the dinner. It was sickening. In fact, I rarely passed more unpleasant moments, so much so that when they did arrive altogether punctually at 6, I was overjoyed to see them as though they were my deliverers, and I even forgot that it was incumbent upon me to show resentment. Why should he show resentment? Because they didn't tell him they moved their dinner. Zherkov walked in ahead of all of them, and evidently he was the leading spirit. He and all of them were laughing. But seeing me, Zherkov drew himself up a little, walked up to me deliberately with a slight, rather jaunty bend from the waist. He bowed. He shook hands with me in a friendly, but not overly friendly fashion, with a sort of circumspect curtsy, like that of a general, as though in giving me his hand he were warding off something. The way he describes the encounter, it's very important to pay attention to this because he is narrating this. Whether or not you believe this is true or what Zherkov did, that's up to you, but your evidence is right here in the narrator's style of narration. I had imagined, on the contrary, that on coming in, he would at once break into his habitual thin, shrill laugh and fall to making his insipid jokes and witticisms. That's what he thought he would do. I had been preparing for them ever since the previous day, but I didn't expect such condensation, such as high official curtsy. Change of behavior that he didn't expect. So then he felt himself inevitably superior to me in every respect. Ha! If he only meant to insult me by that high official tone, it wouldn't matter, I thought. I would pay him back for it one way or another. But what if in reality, without the least desire to be offensive, that sheephead had a notion in earnest that he was superior to me and that he could only look at me in a patronizing way? The very supposition made me gasp. You see how his imagination goes nuts? Quote, I was surprised to hear of your desire to join us, Zherkov began, lisping and drawling, which was something new. You and I seem to have seen nothing of one another. You fight shy of us. You shouldn't. We are not such terrible people as you think. Well, anyway, I'm glad to renew our acquaintance. As he turned carelessly to put down his hat at the window. Quote, have you been waiting long? Trudolobov inquired. I arrived at 5 o'clock as you told me yesterday, I answered aloud with an irritability that threatened an explosion. Didn't you let him know that we had changed the hour, said Trudolov to Simonov. No, Simonov said, I didn't. I forgot, the latter replied. But with no sign of regret and without even apologizing to me, he went off to order the hors d'oeuvres. So, you've been here a whole hour? You poor fellow, Zherkov cried ironically, for to his notions this was bound to be extremely funny. That rascal Farfetchkin followed with his nasty little snigger like a puppy yapping. My position struck him, too, as exquisitely ludicrous and embarrassing. It isn't funny at all, I cried to Farfetchkin, pardon me, more and more irritated. It wasn't my fault, but other people's. They neglected to let me know. It was simply absurd. Quote, it's not only absurd, but something else as well, muttered Trudolobov, naively taking my part. You are not hard enough upon it. It was simply rudeness. It's unintentional, of course, but it was rude. And how could Simonov, If a little trick like that had been played on me, observed Farfetchkin, I should... Zherkov interrupted. But you should have ordered something for yourself, Zherkov interrupted, or simply asked for dinner without waiting for us. Narrator says, you will allow that I might have done that without your permission. I rapped out. If I waited, it would... Let us sit down, gentlemen, cried Simonov. Coming in, everything is ready. I can answer for the champagne. It is capitally frozen. You see, I didn't know your address. Where was I to look for you? He suddenly turned to me. But again, he seemed to avoid looking at me. Evidently, he had something against me. It must have been what happened yesterday. We all sat down. I did the same. It was a round table. Trudolobov was on my left, Simonov on my right, Zherkov was sitting opposite me, and Farfetchkin next to him, between him and Trudolobov. Zherkov says, tell me, are you in government office? He went on, attending to me. Seeing that I was embarrassed, he seriously thought that he ought to be friendly to me, and so to speak, cheer me up. Does he want me to throw a bottle at his head? I thought, in a fury. In my novel surroundings, I was unnaturally ready to be irritated. In the N office, I answered jerkily with my eyes on my plate. And have you a good berth? I say, what made you leave your original job? What made me was that I wanted to leave my original job. I drawled more than he, hardly able to control myself. So he's mocking the way Zherkov talks. Farfetchkin went into the guffaw, right? Loud, boisterous laugh. Simonov looked at me ironically. Trudolobov left off eating and began looking at me with curiosity. Zherkov winced, but he tried not to notice it. And remuneration? What remuneration? Remuneration. What pay? I mean, your salary. Are you cross-examining me? However, I told him at once what my salary was. I turned horribly red. That's not very handsome, Zherkov observed majestically. Yeah, yes, you can afford to dine at cafes on that. You can't afford to dine at cafes on that, Farfetchkin added insolently. To my thinking, it's very poor, Trudolobov observed gravely. And how thin you've grown. How you've changed, added Zherkov with a shade of venom in his voice, scanning me and my attire with a sort of insolent compassion. Does he have insolent compassion, or is that the narrator's judgment? Oh, spare his blushes, cried Farfetchkin, sniggering. My dear sir, allow me to tell you I am not blushing, I broke out at last. Do you hear? I'm dining here at this cafe at my own expense, not at other people's. Note that, Mr. Farfetchkin. What? Isn't everyone here dining at his own expense? You would seem to be. Farfetchkin flew at me, turning as red as a lobster and looking at me in the face with fury. Why is he saying that? Because don't forget, they all agreed to pay for Zherkov, right? That, I answered, feeling that I had gone too far. And I imagine it would be better to talk of something more intelligent. You intend to show off your intelligence, I suppose. Don't disturb yourself. That would be quite out of place here. They're talking to him. Why? Are you clacking away like that, my good sir, huh? Have you gone out of your wits in your office? Enough, gentlemen, enough, Zherkov cried authoritatively. How stupid it is, muttered Simonov. It's really stupid. We have met here, a company of friends, for a farewell dinner to a comrade, and you carry on an altercation, said Trubadolov, rudely addressing himself to me alone. You invited yourself to join us, so don't disturb the general harmony. Enough, cried Zherkov. Give over, gentlemen, it's out of place. Better let me tell you how I nearly got married the day before yesterday. And then followed a burlesque narrative of how this gentleman had almost been married 2 days before. There was not a word about the marriage, however, but the story was adorned with generals, colonels, kammerjunkers. What's a kammerjunker? A courtier title in Russia that's equivalent to a French valet de chambre. This title was usually given to a young nobleman who served a princely rank at court, kammerjunker. While Zherkov almost took the lead among them, it was greeted with approving laughter. Farfetchkin positively squealed. No one paid any attention to me. So I sat crushed and humiliated. Good heavens, I thought, these are not people for me, I thought. And what a fool I've made of myself before them. I let Farfetchkin go too far. The brutes imagine that they're doing me an honor and letting me sit down with them. They don't understand. It's an honor to them, not to me. I've grown thinner. My clothes, those damn trousers. Zherkov noticed the yellow stain on the knee as soon as he came in. But what's the use? I must get up at once. This very minute, take my hat and just go without a word. Go with contempt. Tomorrow I can send the challenge. Those scoundrels. As though I cared about the 7 rubles. They may, damn it, I don't care what the 7 rubles. I'm going to go this minute. Of course, I remained. I drank sherry and Lafitte by the glassful in my discomfort. And being unaccustomed to it, I was quickly affected. My annoyance increased as the wine went to my head. I longed all at once to insult all of them in a most flagrant manner, and then to go away, to seize the moment, and to show them what I could do, so that they would say, hey, he's clever, though he's absurd. Oh, damn them all! I scanned them all insolently with my drowsy eyes, but they seemed to have forgotten me altogether. They were noisy, boisterous, cheerful. Zherkov was talking all the time. I began listening. Zherkov was talking about some exuberant lady whom he had at last led on declaring her love. Of course, he was lying like a horse. Does a horse lie? And how he had been helped in this affair by an intimate friend of his, Prince Kola, an officer of the Hussars, who had 3,000 serfs. Remember, a person's wealth is judged by the number of serfs that they have in Russia. And yet this Kolya, who had 3,000 serfs, had not put in an appearance here tonight to see you off? I cut in suddenly. So he actually speaks. So this guy didn't show up tonight? And for a minute, everyone was silent. You're drunk already, Trudolubov said. And he noticed me, glancing contemptuously in my direction. Zherkov, without a word, examined me as though I were an insect. There it is again, right? His self-image, he's an insect. I want to call your attention to Franz Kafka and the book that he wrote called The Metamorphosis, which you're going to read. We're going to read on the website if we haven't done it already. It's about a guy who wakes up one day and finds out he's a cockroach. Okay. Where examined me as though I were an insect. I dropped my eyes. Simonov made haste to fill up the glasses with champagne. Trudolubov raised his glass, as did everyone else but me. Your health and good luck on the journey, he cried to Zherkov. To old times, to our futures. Hurrah! And they all tossed off their glasses and crowded around Zherkov to kiss him. I didn't move. My full glass stood untouched before me. Why aren't you going to drink it? Roared Trudolubov, losing patience and turning menacingly at me. I want to make a speech separately on my own account, and then I'll drink it, Mr. Trudolubov. You spiteful brute, muttered Simonov. I drew myself up in my chair and feverishly seized my glass and prepared for something extraordinary, though I didn't know myself precisely what I was going to say. Silence, cried Ferfetchkin. Now, for a display of wit. Zherkov waited very gravely, knowing what was coming. Mr. Lieutenant Zherkov, I began, let me tell you that I hate phrases, phrasemongers, and men in corsets. That's the first point. And there is a second one to follow it. There was a general stir. The second point is I hate ribaldry and ribald talkers. Ribaldry, amusingly coarse and irreverent talk and behavior, especially ribald talkers. The third point, I love justice, truth, and honesty. I went on almost mechanically, for I was beginning to shiver with horror myself and had no idea how I came to be talking like this. I love thought, Monsieur Zherkov. I love true comradeship on an equal footing and but however, why not? I will drink your health too, Mr. Zherkov. Seduce the Circean girls, shoot the enemies of the fatherland, and to your health, Monsieur Zherkov. Zherkov got up from his seat, bowed to me, and said, I am very much obliged to you. He was frightfully offended, and he turned pale. Damn that fellow, roared Trudolubov, bringing his fist down on the table. Well, he wants a punch in the face for that, squealed Ferfetchkin. We ought to throw him out, muttered Simonov. Not a word, gentlemen. Not a movement, cried Zherkov solemnly, checking the general indignation. I thank all of you, but I can show him for myself how much I attach to his words. Mr. Ferfetchkin will give you satisfaction tomorrow for your words just now, I said aloud, turning my dignity to Ferfetchkin. Mr. Ferfetchkin, you will give me satisfaction tomorrow. He's challenging him to a duel. A duel? You mean certainly, he answered, but probably I was so ridiculous as I challenged him and it was so out of keeping with my appearance that everyone, including Farfetchkin, was prostrate with laughter. As you should be too, ladies and gentlemen. Don't drink too much. Yes, let him alone, of course. He's quite drunk, Trudolobov said with disgust. I shall never forgive myself for letting him join us, Simonov muttered. Now is the time to throw a bottle at their heads, I thought to myself. And I picked up the bottle, and I filled my glass. No, I'd better sit on to the end, I went on thinking. You would be pleased, my friends, if I went away. Nothing will induce me to go. I'll go on sitting here, and I'll be drinking to the end on purpose, as a sign that I don't think you of the slightest consequences. I will go on sitting and drinking because this is a public house. He's thinking all this to himself because this is a public house and I paid my entrance money. I'm going to sit here and drink, and I'll look upon you as so many pawns, as inanimate pawns. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to drink. And I'm going to sing if I want to. I'm going to sing, for I have a right to sing, huh? But I didn't sing. I simply tried not to look at any of them. I assumed most unconcerned attitude and waited with impatience for them to speak first. But alas, they didn't address me. Oh, how I wished at that moment to be reconciled to them. It struck 8, and at last 9, and they moved from the table to the sofa. And Zherkov stretched himself out on a lounge and put one foot on a round table. Wine was brought in. He did, as a fact, order 3 bottles on his own account. I, of course, was not invited to join them. They all sat around the sofa. They listened to him, Zherkov, almost with reverence, and it was evident that they were fond of him. What for? What for, I wondered. And from time to time, they were moved to drunken enthusiasm, and they kissed each other. They talked of the Caucasus, of the nature of the true passion, of snug berths in the service, and of the income of a hussar called Podaharsky, whom none of them knew personally, and then they rejoiced in the largeness of it, and of the extraordinary grace and the beauty of Princess D, whom none of them had ever seen, but then it came to Shakespeare being immortal. I smiled contemptuously, and I walked up and down the other side of the room, opposite the sofa, from the table to the stove, and from the stove to the table back again. I tried my very utmost, to show them that I could do without them. And yet, I purposely made a noise with my boots, thumping at the heels. But it was all in vain. They paid no attention. I had the patience to walk up and down in front of them from 8 o'clock until 11. I want you to think about that. I had the patience to walk 4 hours in the same place, from the table to the stove and back again. Wow. I walk up and down to please myself, and no one can prevent me, he says to himself. The waiter who came into the room stopped from time to time to look at me, and I was somewhat giddy from turning around so often. At moments, it seemed to me that I was in delirium. During those 3 hours, 8, 9, 10, 11, right? 3 hours, sorry. I was 3 times soaked with sweat and dry again. At times, with an intense acute pain, I was stabbed to the heart by the thought that 10 years, 20 years, 40 years would pass, and that even in 40 years I would remember with loathing and humiliation those filthiest, most ludicrous, and most awful moments of my life. No one could have gone out of his way to degrade himself more shamelessly, and I realized it fully And yet, I went on pacing up and down from the table to the stove. Quote, "Oh, if you only knew what thoughts and feelings I'm capable of. How cultured I am." I thought at moments mentally addressing the sofa on which my enemies were sitting. I'm going to talk to the sofa. But my enemies behaved as though I were not in the room. Once, and only once, they turned toward me, just when Zherkov was talking about Shakespeare. Why do you think that is? When he's talking about Shakespeare, they turn to him, because they know he reads books, right? And suddenly I gave a contemptuous laugh. I laughed at such an affected and disgusting way that they all at once broke off their conversation and silently and gravely for 2 minutes they watched me walking up and down from table to the stove, taking no notice of them. But nothing came of it. They said nothing, and 2 minutes later they ceased to notice me again, and then it struck 11. "Friends," cried Zherkov, getting up from the sofa, "let us all be off now. There." Of course, the others assented. I turned sharply to Zherkov. I was so harassed, so exhausted, that I would have cut my throat to put an end to it. I was in a fever. My hair was soaked with perspiration, and it stuck to my forehead and temples. "Zherkov, I beg your pardon," I said abruptly and resolutely. "Farfetchkin, yours too, and everyone's. I have insulted all of you." "Aha! A duel is not in your line, old man," Farfetchkin hissed venomously. So he thinks that his apology is taking it sent a pang to my heart. No, it's not the duel I'm afraid of, Farfetchkin. I'm ready to fight you tomorrow after we've been reconciled. I insist on it. In fact, you cannot refuse. I want to show you that I am not afraid of a duel. You shall fire first, and I shall fire into the air." "He's comforting himself," said Simonov. "He's simply raving," said Trudolobov. "But let us pass. Why are you barring our way? What do you want?" Zherkov answered disdainfully. They were all flushed, their eyes were bright, and they had been drinking heavily. "I ask for your friendship, Zherkov. I insulted you. But insulted? You? Insulted me? Understand, sir, that you never, under any circumstances, could possibly insult me. And that's enough for you. Out of the way," concluded Trudolobov. "Olympia is mine, friends." "That's agreed," cried Zherkov. "We won't dispute your right, but we won't dispute your right," the others answered, laughing. That must be a "Olympia is mine." I stood as though spat upon. The party went noisily out of the room. Trudolobov struck up some stupid song. Simonov remained behind for a moment to tip the waiters, and then I suddenly went up to him. "Simonov, give me 6 rubles, I said, in desperate resolution. He looked at me in extreme amazement with vacant eyes. He was drunk. You don't mean you're coming with us?" "Yes, but I have no money." He snapped out with a scornful laugh, and he went out of the room. I clutched at his overcoat. It was a nightmare. He's begging for money. "Simonov, I saw you had money. Why do you refuse me? Am I a scoundrel? Beware of refusing me. If you knew why I was asking, my whole future, my plans depend on it." Simonov pulled out the money and almost flung it at me. "Take it! If you have no sense or of shame," he pronounced piteously, and he ran to overtake the others. I was left for a moment alone. Disorder that remains of dinner, a broken wineglass on the floor, spilt wine, cigarette ends, fumes of drink, delirium in my brain. It was an agonizing misery in my heart. And finally the waiter, who had seen and heard all, was looking inquisitively into my face. "I'm going there," I cried. "Either they shall all go down on their knees and beg my forgiveness, or I will give Zherkov a slap in the face." Jesus Christ. Chapter 5. So this is it. This is the last contact with real life, I muttered as I ran headlong downstairs. This is very different from the popes leaving Rome and going to Brazil, and very different from the ball on Lake Como. You are a scoundrel, a thought flashed in my mind. If you laugh at this now. No matter, I cried, answering myself. Now everything is lost. There was no trace of them, but it made no difference. I knew where they'd gone. At the steps was standing a solitary night sledge driver in a rough peasant coat, powdered all over with still falling wet and as it were warm snow. It was hot and steamy. The little shaggy piebald horse, piebald is a horse having irregular patches of two colors, Appaloosa, right? And was also covered with snow and coughing, and I remember that very well. I made a rush for the roughly made sledge, but as soon as I raised my foot to get into it, the recollection of how Simonov had just given me 6 rubles seemed to double me up, and I tumbled into the sledge like a sack. No, I must do a great deal to make up for that, I cried. But I will make up for it, or I will perish on the spot this very night. Start! We set off. There was a perfect whirl in my head. They won't go down to their knees and beg me for friendship. That's a mirage. That's a cheap mirage. Revolting, romantic, fantastical. That's another ball like Lake Como. And so I'm bound to slap Zherkov's face. It's my duty. And so it's settled. I am flying to give him a slap in the face. Hurry up! The driver tugged at the reins. As soon as I go in, I'll give it to him. Before giving it to the slap, I should say a few words of preface. No, I simply go in and give him the slap. They will all be sitting in the drawing room, and he with Olympia on the sofa. So Olympia, that damned Olympia. She laughed at my looks on one occasion and refused me. So she must be, they're going to a house of ill repute, and she must be the madam, right? So now we know what he was calling for Olympia. They're going to the house of ill repute. The bordello, right? The bordello, pardon me. I'll pull Olympia's hair and I'll pull Zherkov's ears. No, better one ear. I'll pull him by one ear and by around the room, and maybe they will all begin beating me and they'll kick me out. That's most likely. Well, no matter. Anyway, I'm going to slap him, and the initiative will be mine. And by the laws of honor, that's everything. He will be branded, and he cannot wipe off the slap by any blows, and there'll be nothing but we'll have to duel, and he'll be forced to fight. And then let him beat me now. Let them, the ungrateful wretches. Trubadolov will beat me the hardest. He's strong. Ferfetchkin will be sure to catch hold sideways and tug at my hair. But no matter. That's what I'm going for. These blockheads will be forced to at last see the tragedy of it all. And when they drag me to the door, I shall call out at them that in reality they are not worth my little finger. Get on, driver, get on! I cried to the driver, and he started and flicked his whip. I shouted so savagely. We shall fight at daybreak. This is all in his head. Can you say that he's drunk? No, because he's writing this after the fact. This is a confession. He's telling us his innermost secrets. Do you understand this? He's revealing himself to us. Well, can we believe him, Jim? Jimmy, can we believe this guy? I think you can now, right? He wants to slap Zherkov. A big thing for him is the slapping, isn't it? Because he's lived in his head now, and this is reality. Ferfetchkin made a joke about it just now, but where can I get pistols? Nonsense. I'll get my salary in advance and I'll buy them. What about powder and bullets? That's the seconds business. Seconds are people, when you fight a duel, those are the people who arrange the duel on behalf of the duelists. And how can it be done by daybreak? Where am I to get the seconds? I've got no friends. Nonsense, I cried, lashing myself up more and more. It's of no consequence. The first person I meet in the street is bound to be my second, just as he would be bound to pull a drowning man out of the water. The most eccentric things may happen. Even if I were to ask the director himself to be my second. That's his boss, right? Tomorrow he would be bound to consent, if only from a feeling of chivalry. And to keep the secret, Anton Antovich, that's his boss, right? The fact is, at that very minute, the disgusting absurdity of my plan and the other side of the question was clearer and more vivid to my imagination than it could be to anyone on earth. Get on, driver, you old rascal. Oh, sir. And then the son said, the son of toil. Said the son of toil. Cold shivers ran down me. Wouldn't it be better to go home? My God, why did I invite myself to this dinner yesterday? But no, it's impossible. And my walking up and down for 3 hours from the table to the stove? Nah, no one else must pay for my walking up and down. They must wipe out this dishonor. Drive on! And what if they give me into custody? Nah, they wouldn't dare. They'll be afraid of the scandal. And what if Zherkov is so contemptuous that he refuses to fight a duel? He is sure to. But in that case, I'll show them. I will turn up at the posting station when he is setting off tomorrow, and I'll catch him by the leg, and I'll pull off his coat when he gets into the carriage, and I'll get my teeth into his hand, and I'll bite him. See what lengths you can drive a desperate man to? He may hit me on the head, and he may belabor me from behind, and I will shout to the assembled multitude, look at this young puppy who is driving off to captivate the Kherson girls after letting me spit in his face. Of course, after that, everything will be over. The office will have vanished off the face of the earth, and I shall be arrested. I shall be tried, and I shall be dismissed from the service, thrown into prison, and sent to Siberia. Never mind. In 15 years, when they let me out of prison, I will trudge off to him, a beggar in rags, and I shall find him in some provincial town. He'll be married and happy, and he will have a grown-up daughter, and I shall say to him, look, monster, at my hollow cheeks and my rags. I've lost everything, my career, my happiness, art, science, the woman I love, and all through you. Here are the pistols. I've come to discharge my pistol, and I will forgive you. And then I shall fire into the air, and he will hear nothing more of me. What is he talking about? We're going to have to examine this very closely, ladies and gentlemen. What is he talking about? This is all going on inside this guy's head. Well, Jimmy, he's just nuts. Is he? You know anybody that lives in their head like this? I was actually on the point of tears. I shouldn't be laughing at this guy. He's driving himself nuts. I was actually on the point of tears, though I knew perfectly well at that moment that all of this was out of Pushkin's Silvio and Lermontov's Masquerade. Masquerade is a verse play written in 1835 by the romantic Silvio. Silvio's the main character. This was written, the four-act play in the 1830s, blah, blah, blah. Silvio is the main character in Pushkin's short story, The Shot. Silvio is a retired military officer who seeks revenge on the Count, and you can look those up. He has taken pieces of a book and brought it into his head, and he's trying to transfer the pieces of the book into the reality around him. This story, this novel, this Notes from Underground is a story about reality. What is real? What is not real? That's what's going to be the discussion, ladies and gentlemen. That's the discussion. All at once I felt horribly ashamed, so ashamed, that I stopped the horse and I got out of the sledge and I stood still in the snow in the middle of the street. and the driver just gazed at me, sighing, astonished. What was I to do? I could not go there. It was evidently stupid. I could not leave things as they were, because that would seem as though, like he's giving in, right? Heavens! How can I leave things? And after such insult? No, I cried, throwing myself into the sledge again. It's ordained. It's fate. Drive on. And in my impatience, I punched the sledge driver on the back of the neck. What are you up to? Said the driver. What are you hitting me for? The peasant shouted. But he whipped up his nag, and then it began kicking. He's whipping the nag. The wet snow was falling in big flakes. I unbuttoned myself regardless of it. I forgot everything else, for I had finally decided on the slap. I'm going to slap him. And felt with horror that it was going to happen now at once, and that no force could stop it. The deserted street lamps gleamed suddenly at the snowy darkness, like torches at a funeral. Notice the way he writes. He's got a little poetry in him. The snow drifted under my greatcoat, under my coat, under my cravat, melted there, and I did not wrap myself up because all was lost anyway. At last we arrived. I jumped out almost unconscious, and I ran up the steps, began knocking and kicking at the door. I was fearfully weak, particularly in my legs and knees, and the door was opened quickly as though they knew I was coming. As a fact, Simonov had warned them that perhaps another gentleman would arrive, and that this was a place in which one had to give notice to observe certain precautions. It was one of those military establishments which were abolished by the police a good time ago. So it's not only a bordello, it's an illegal bordello. By day, it was really a shop, but at night, if you had an introduction, a speakeasy, one might visit it for other purposes. I walked rapidly into the dark shop, into the familiar drawing room. Familiar. He's been here before, where there was only one candle burning, and stood still in amazement. There was no one there. Where are they? I asked somebody. But by now, of course, they had separated. They went, right? You know what they're doing, right? Before me was standing a person with a stupid smile, the Madame herself, who had seen me before. A minute later, a door opened and another person came in, taking no notice of anything. I strode over about the room, and I believe I talked to myself. I felt as though I had been saved from death and was conscious of this joyfully all over. I should have given that slap. See, oh, God. Oh, they're not here. I'm redeemed, right? But now watch what he does. I should have given the slap. I should certainly have given it. But now they were not here, and everything had vanished and changed. I looked around, and I could not realize my condition yet. I looked mechanically at the girl who had come in, the prostitute, and had a glimpse of a fresh, young, rather pale face, with straight, dark eyebrows, and with grave, as it were, wondering eyes that attracted me at once. I should have hated her if she had been smiling. I began looking at her more intently, and as it were, with effort. I had not fully collected my thoughts. There was something simple and good-natured in her face, but something strangely grave. I am sure that this stood in her way here, right? And no one of those fools had noticed her. She could not, however, have been called a beauty, though she was tall, strong-looking, and well-built. She was very simply dressed. Something loathsome stirred in me. I went straight up to her. I chanced to look into the glass. My harassed face struck me as revolting in the extreme. It was pale, angry, abject, with disheveled hair. No matter. I'm glad of it, I thought. I'm glad that I seem repulsive to her. I like that. Chapter 6. Somewhere behind a screen, a clock began wheezing as though oppressed by something, as though someone were straining at it, strangling it. After an unnaturally prolonged wheezing, there followed a shrill, nasty, and as it were, unexpectedly rapid chime, as though someone were suddenly jumping forward. It struck 2. I woke up, though I had indeed not been asleep but lying half-conscious. It was almost completely dark in the narrow, cramped, low-pitched room, cumbered up with an enormous wardrobe, piles of cardboard boxes, pardon me, and all sorts of frippery and litter. The candle end that had been burning on the table was going out and gave a faint flicker from time to time. In a few minutes there would be complete darkness. I was not long in coming to myself. Everything came back to me, to my mind at once, without an effort, as though it had been in ambush to pounce on me again. And indeed, even while I was unconscious, a point seemed continually to remain in my memory, unforgotten, and rounded in my dreams moved drearily. But strange to say, everything that had happened to me in that day seemed to me now, on waking, to be far, far away, past, as though I had long, long ago lived it all down. My head was full of fumes. Something seemed to be hovering over me, rousing me, exciting me, making me restless. Misery and spite seemed surging up in me again and seeking an outlet. Suddenly I saw beside me 2 wide-open eyes, scrutinizing me curiously and persistently. The look in those eyes was coldly detached, sullen, as if it were utterly remote, and it weighed upon me. A grim idea came into my brain and passed all over my body, as a horrible sensation such as one feels when one goes into a damp and moldy cellar. There was something unnatural in those 2 eyes, beginning to look at me now. I recall, too, that during those 2 hours, I hadn't said a single word to this creature, and I had, in fact, considered it utterly superfluous. In fact, the silence had, for some reason, gratified me. And now I suddenly realized vividly the hideous idea, revolting as a spider, of vice, which without love grossly and shamelessly begins with that in which true love finds its consummation. You know what he's thinking about. For a long time, we gazed at each other like that, but she did not drop her eyes before mine, and her expression didn't change. And so at last, I felt uncomfortable. "What's your name?" I asked abruptly to put an end to the silence. "Lisa," she answered almost in a whisper, but somehow far from graciously, as she turned her eyes away. I was silent. "What weather!" "The snow. It's disgusting," I said, almost to myself, putting my arm under my head despondently and gazing at the ceiling. She made no answer. This was horrible. "Have you always lived in Petersburg?" I asked her a minute later, almost angrily turning my head slightly toward her. Whoa! Whoa! Part 5. Whoa! What's going on here, ladies and gentlemen? This guy's a character. You see, the Dostoevsky, what a masterful writer he is. If you let yourself into the story, you have to let yourself into the story. I know. This is not a war story. This is not Patton. I've read your book. When he's fighting the tank war, right? This is action inside a person. This is probably psychologically unbelievably intense. Do you understand? When this guy is all he wants to do is slap Zherkov. He works himself up to a fever pitch. And he gets there, and of course, Zherkov's not there. None of the guys are there. So he feels relieved that he doesn't have to do it. You've been reading with Jimmy. This is part 5 of 8 parts. We're reading Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I hope you're enjoying it. Come back for part 6. So 3 more parts and we're done. We'll analyze this puppy, right? Reading with Jimmy. Jimmy at Reading with Jimmy is my email. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. is my email. We'd love to have your questions, comments about this anonymous narrator who is pretty much intense, and sometimes you want to pop the guy, don't you? Can you imagine walking up and down, pacing for 3 hours in the same place? Remember, too, this is way before cell phones and television. It's like, it also tells you what to do when you drink too much. Don't do it. Thanks for dropping by. Enjoy your day, or whatever you're doing, and we'll talk to you soon. Come back. Thanks for being here.